It's a word this grandmother never even heard while she was growing up. And whenever she heard it in recent years on TV, all she could do was shake her head. But now she's hearing it from her sweet little granddaughter. Grammy, I'm trans, the young child announces. Grammy's eyes and mouth pop open in shock, and the little girl's smile turns to a frown as she notices her grandmother's reaction. But she continues defensively, my best friend at school is trans, so I'm trans too. This isn't hypothetical. I know a lady personally who heard these very words from her little granddaughter. And many other parents and grandparents are hearing similar words from kids in public school. Although another common scenario today is that the school encourages and aids the child's gender identity transition while keeping it secret from the parents. What will you do if you find this has happened in your own family? Chances are you'll panic. Whatever you do, it will be like closing the barn door after the horses escaped, or like shutting off the oven after the turkey burned to a crisp. Damage has already been done. Really, now what are you going to do? The little child is confused and upset already, but if nothing is done, she'll continue down a road that leads increasingly to depression, substance abuse, and even suicide. That's what research statistics show. An official U.S. government website of the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, carries this headline that says, differences in youth suicidality based on gender identity. And then it reports researchers found that transgender youth had 2.7 times higher odds of past year suicide attempts and 2.5 times higher odds of past year suicide attempts requiring treatment compared with cisgender youth, those whose gender identity corresponds with their sex assigned at birth. So transgenderism nearly triples the suicide rate among young people who go down that path. And those suicides are just the tip of the iceberg, reflecting the troubles and unhappy lives of the kids who don't go quite that far in dealing with their sadness and despair. That's what the little girl faces if you do nothing and just let her continue on the trajectory she announced for herself when she said, Grammy, I'm trans. She's too young, of course, to know the outcome of what she's doing or where that transgender path leads. But she's also too young to grasp that you're trying to help her if you say things to turn her against her best friend. She's too young to realize that even if she comes to her senses after a while, the transgender label she adopted from her friend is liable to stick with her and affect her relationships for years to come. She's way too young to make a choice that will have a huge negative impact on the rest of her life. Even if you scoop her up now and remove her from that school and cut her off from that trans friend, that label is liable to follow her and mark her in the new school you put her in. And the gender confusion that has already taken root in her mind will continue to be hard to deal with. Besides, a new public school is liable to be following the same state or federally mandated policies requiring teachers to ask youngsters to choose their pronouns, to choose whether they want to be boys or girls. And you may not even know what's happening with your own child. A November 12, 2024 Wall Street Journal op-ed by William McGurn points out that today there are policies that let students live by a different gender identity during school hours, while their moms and dads are deliberately kept in the dark. Some of those policies are prompted by federal government mandates under Title IX, while others are in place due to state laws or local school board decisions. But these public school policies are widespread, as noted in the Wall Street Journal. Do you know if your son or grandson is masquerading as a girl during school hours? Do you know if your daughter or granddaughter is using the boys' restroom and the boys' locker room? Public schools that have these policies in place fight vigorously to keep parents from finding out whether their own children are being treated as the opposite sex at school. So this could be already happening to your son or daughter without your knowledge or permission. School teachers trained during the 1950s and 60s were already being instructed that professionals and authorities are better equipped than parents to make decisions about their children. So that high-handed mentality was already solidly in place, making it easy for the public schools to adopt the new policies promoting kids' gender change without parental knowledge or consent. Teachers who violate these policies by telling parents what their kids are doing at school have even been fired on the grounds that they violated student privacy. A January 2023 article that appeared in the New York Times and elsewhere online is titled, "When Students Change Gender Identity and Parents Don't Know." It begins by telling of a California mother who was surprised to see a boy's name at the top of her 15-year-old daughter's homework assignment. The daughter explained that she'd been living as a boy at school for 6 months, with the full knowledge and cooperation of the teachers and administrators. The adults who ran the school called the girl by a boy's name and expected her to use the boys' bathroom. The mother found out only by accident. And by that time, the daughter was asking for hormone replacement medications and for surgery to remove her breasts. The article explained that this is far from an isolated case. The article said that public school is one of many throughout the country that allows students to socially transition, change their name, pronouns, or gender expression without parental consent. The article goes on to tell of another parent, a father of an 11-year-old sixth grader, who also learned belatedly of the child's similar gender switching at school. This time, though, the sixth grade teacher eventually listened to her conscience and shared that information with the father. The Massachusetts School District responded by sending that teacher a termination letter, telling her she was being fired, in part for disclosing what they called, quote, sensitive confidential information about a student's expressed gender identity against the wishes of the student, end quote. Never mind that the so-called confidential information was disclosed to the child's father. All down through history, societies worldwide recognize the father as the one in charge, not someone to be sidelined and kept in the dark by high-handed public employees. This is absolutely unacceptable to Christian parents who read and believe the Bible. And not just Christians. For centuries, nearly everyone on earth acknowledged the natural order of things, expressed in the Bible at Deuteronomy 22:5, where it says, "A woman must not wear men's clothing, and a man must not wear woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord your God." Human societies all over the world had traditionally followed that principle, whether they knew it was in the Bible or not, simply because it's the natural thing to do. Cross-dressing has always been regarded as unnatural and perverted. So religious people are not the only ones offended. Beer-drinking men who boycotted Bud Light are offended as well. They boycotted the beer brand when the brewery partnered with a popular transgender web personality to advertise their product. Men have always seen cross-dressing men masquerading as women as a threat to their masculinity. They instinctively know that the fake woman who shows up on the bar stool next to them did not come to the bar to make a fashion statement, but rather to flirt with them and seduce them before they discover the fraudulent identity. And depending on how far the man has gone in feeling attracted to and even sexually stimulated by the imposter, he is infuriated and enraged. That's how beer-drinking men reacted when they saw video clips of a young man promoting Bud Light while dressed as a woman and displaying feminine gestures and mannerisms. If they thought, even for a moment, that they were looking at an attractive woman, they were just as enraged as if the encounter had taken place in person. So all religious considerations aside, men don't want to see their boys, their own sons, wearing dresses and seducing other men. Consumers were also offended when Target marketed a so-called pride collection of clothing to homosexuals and lesbians, including a line of transgender clothing for children. After discussing the Bud Light fiasco that caused Bud Light to permanently lose its status as the top seller, this article I'm showing now in Friday's Wall Street Journal says Target stock lost $10 billion as a result because parents didn't like the stores pushing transgenderism. Just as boycotts dealt blows to Target and Bud Light, parents pulling their support from public figures who promote the same perversions may eventually reshape public school policies. But that could take years if it happens at all. In the meantime, what about your children? In some places, like Massachusetts, school policies promoting transgenderism and other perversions have been in place for decades. In other parts of the country, they've been implemented only recently, but they were in the works for decades. So it will take time to reverse them. In the meantime, what will you do about your children? What will you do if you hear, "Grammy, I'm trans," or "Mom and Dad, I'm trans"? Well, actually, there isn't much you can do. In many parts of the country, it's actually illegal to get professional counseling for your child. The counselor can lose their license to practice, or can face fines or even jail for helping to straighten out a youngster who's been drawn into transgender or homosexual thinking. In 2019, Massachusetts became the 16th state where it's illegal for counselors to try to talk a young person out of pursuing a homosexual or transgender lifestyle. So it's against the law for a counselor to tell a child or teenager that homosexual conduct is a sin. A Christian counselor who reads to a youngster the Bible verses that condemn those sins could lose his or her license and be put out of business, even if the parents hired the counselor to give that help to their child, and even if the youngster asks for help to overcome unwanted homosexual desires or gender confusion. It is illegal to counsel such a youngster to help them return to normal thinking about sex and gender. This reminds me of a post that's been circulating on Facebook. It says, "First we ignore evil, then we permit evil, then we legalize evil, then we promote evil, then we celebrate evil, then we persecute those who still call it evil." And the post concludes by quoting Isaiah 5:20. "Woe unto them who call evil good and good evil." Yes, in many jurisdictions in this country and worldwide, it's now considered evil or even illegal to counsel or help a disturbed youngster caught up in the fad of transgenderism. And that's one more reason why it's so dangerous to leave our children and grandchildren in an environment like the public schools that promote and celebrate these perversions. The schools that once were an instrument for good are now a tool in the devil's hands for indoctrinating children in things that are demonic and perverted. They use transgender pronouns in the classroom, and it's now common to find gay pride flags and posters hung in school hallways, cafeterias, and throughout the school. Parents who send their children to public school today might as well be sending them to school in Sodom and Gomorrah, schools that teach them the perverted ways of ancient Sodom and Gomorrah. The Bible is very clear that same-sex relationships are always sinful. Leviticus 18:22 says, "Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable." And God uses the same language for transgender behavior. Deuteronomy 22:5 says, "A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord your God detests anyone who does this." The New Testament is just as clear in condemning homosexual and lesbian behavior. It says, "God gave them up to dishonorable passions, for their women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. And the men likewise gave up natural relations with women, and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men, and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error. And since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done." God uses Sodom throughout the Bible as an example of the very worst sinners. Yet the ways of Sodom and Gomorrah are being celebrated and promoted in our public schools today. And that is messing up children's emotions in this world and dooming their souls to damnation in the next world. So what are Christian parents and grandparents to do to avoid hearing the fateful words, "Grammy, I'm trans"? Christians over the centuries have faced challenges to overcome in order to remain faithful to God. And this is the main challenge facing Christian parents and grandparents today. In some parts of the country, it may still be possible to resist the de-Christianization of the schools by becoming active as a school board member. But state and federal mandates have taken much of their power away from local school boards. Some parents have worked with their church to set up a Christian school under the church's umbrella. If parents can't swing Christian school tuition financially, there are many grandparents committed to safeguarding their grandchildren who have offered the needed funds. If that isn't possible, if there is no sound Christian school nearby, or the tuition is prohibitive, then homeschooling is another option. Multiple families can get together to help one another homeschool their children. And there are online resources that provide remote learning opportunities with a biblical curriculum. Just Google Crosswalk Homeschool Resources 2024, and you will find this article with all sorts of helpful links. Or go to homeschool.com, where you will find abundant resources, as well as links to local homeschool support groups, including some near you. Parents need to face the facts. If you send your children into a classroom that undermines belief in God and that promotes sexual perversion, your child will suffer damage to their emotions and their faith. You owe it to God and to your children to do something. But who can afford to pay Christian school tuition on top of the taxes you already pay for the public schools? Or who can afford to have one parent stay at home to homeschool their children? These can be tough questions, but it's also tough to ask, who can afford to see their children embracing perversion that will ruin their lives and doom them to damnation? Baptizing them as babies or getting them to recite the sinner's prayer as toddlers will not protect them if you hand them over to Satan to teach them each day. Are you ready to do what it takes to protect your children's emotions and their souls? Are you ready to look for a sound Christian school in your area? Are you ready to find the groups that provide materials and that help parents get together to homeschool their children? Don't wait. As difficult as it may seem to protect them now, it will be easier than what you will face after you hear the words, "Grammy, I'm trans." Are you ready to make the sacrifices it will take to safeguard your children? Jesus died on the cross for you. What are you willing to do for your children?